Just doing some voice testing, audio testing. See if
All
the
right, I'm gonna
sound is
test me.
coming through.
Cool.
Alrighty. I'll kick us off.
Yeah. So welcome to the first ever award show here on the podcast. This is for 2021 Spring Gauntlet. Technically week number 13 for the Gauntlet, but for here it's gonna be the award show where we kind of discuss a variety of topics and what we deem as the best in this season. In terms of the format, uh, besides the Gauntlet Champion, the Gauntlet Runner-ups, everything else we individually selected. So we talked a lot about the format in the previous podcast. At the end, we're nixing that. What we ended up doing was for each award, we personally chose who we thought was the best in that category. And if it was the same, you'll see that there's no letters at the top of the title. So, for example, our first award would be the best first episode. If we both voted for the same show, you're just gonna see best first episode. But if we both selected different episodes, you'll see best first episode M or J, and then that person can go ahead and explain why they gave that award.
Yeah.
Only the Gauntlet Champion and Gauntlet Runner-ups, those are actually we tallied from our personal rankings, and so we had a first place, and then we had second, and somewhat of a tie, almost tie for third that had to be broken with our other rankings. So, yeah. Other than that, I think that's pretty much all you need to know for right now. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see the beautiful illustration again of the past 13 weeks.
Yeah, there's a lot of shows that were originally there at the start of the Gauntlet, and only a couple were of high quality enough to quote unquote survive the entire Gauntlet. And so yeah, the ones that are still in color, as you can see on the visual for those of you who are watching, those are the ones that have essentially survived the Gauntlet.
Yeah, and we're gonna go ahead and recognize those shows. So on to I listed this out alphabetically. So the first show on the list is gonna be 86. And here are the scores. I don't know if you should we go ahead and say the scores, or what do you think?
No, let's give it a recap of the scores.
All right, so for 86, I gave the score of 6.40. John, you gave it a score of 7.27 for a overall average of 6.84.
Alrighty, we're gonna dive into more about what we like in all the shows, and so for the first part, we're just gonna go really high level, give us the scores and all that, and we'll talk about the shows a lot more in detail later. For the next one is Koikimo. Minatsu gave it a score of 5.95. I gave it a score of 6.08, which brings the average to 6.02. This one was pretty close. I wonder if this is the closest score we've had overall. But yeah, that's Koikimo. And the next one we have is
Taxi. I gave it a score of 6.68. You gave it a score of 7.42 for an overall average of 7.05.
And the next one is The Way of the House Husband. Minatsu gave a score of 5.1. I gave it a score of 5.2. And the overall average is 5.15.
Next up is Those Snow White Notes. I gave it a score of 6.59. John gave it a score of 7.67 for an overall average of 7.13.
And To Your Eternity. Minatsu gave it a score of 6.15. I gave it a score of a flat 6.0. And the overall average is 6.08. Just as a note, this anime is still ongoing, unlike many of the shows that have already kind of concluded. But this total that we have in terms of ratings are for essentially all the ways up to episode 12. All the way up to episode 12.
And off that topic, the next show is also still airing. That's going to be Tokyo Revengers. I gave it a score of 5.89. You gave it a score of 5.58 for a rolling average of 5.74. Again, this is only the scores from episodes 1 to 12.
Yeah, and the reason we kind of chose to do the breaking points for 12 for both of these shows is because, like, in terms of story, they kind of like closed out arcs, and so episode 12. The next one is Vivi Fluorite's Eyes Song. Minatsu, you gave it a score of 7.52. I gave it a score of 8.08, and the overall average was a 7.8.
Yeah, and that's the final show on this list.
Alrighty. So
So yeah,
we have the awards show. So give us a little bit more details about what's going to happen. And yeah, and we'll hop right in.
yeah. So the first thing you're gonna see is the award that is going to be categorized,
Okay.
uh, and then we can kind of do some discussions or not. It just depends on what we're feeling. Also
Yeah.
depends on if it's a unanimous decision or if it's a split decision.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can kind of decide where to go from there. But you guys who are listening in or watching, you can kind of try to guess or think or say what you think deserves the award, and you'll see if we agree with you or not. And I think
Alrighty.
that's all we really need to say. And so you can go ahead and show them the first award, which is best first episode. You'll notice there's no M or J, so this is unanimous. And the
Yeah.
winner goes to.
The winner goes to those Snow White Notes. This one was not too surprising to me. I think that this was one of the shows I think that if I'm just gonna be honest, like not only was this the best first episode, just frankly speaking, this is also one of the shows that had the biggest, I would say the overall biggest, like, shall we say, um drop off between the first episode and the other ones. And
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you can kind of interpret it a little bit of both ways. Some of you can say, "Oh yeah, the show didn't deliver up to the hype," but on the other side of it, like it was like a truly like just magical first episode. I definitely will say that even it just in my memories of animes like that I've just watched in my entire life, there haven't been a lot of them that have captivated to this degree just on the first episode. Even some of my most favorite animes of all time, sometimes their first episodes are relatively, shall we say, like, oh, it's interesting, but you kind of have to like dig in a little bit more to figure out like what's going on. For this one, it just came right out of the gate swinging. I think the sequence of the grandfather dying and our main character going into the city to try to discover this lost voice. Just for the purposes of this, just because this first episode was there, I ended up watching the first episode again just to like kind of refresh my memory, and I gotta say that like it's a combination. I think it was a very charming um interpretation of slice of life, and I'll be very honest and say that like yeah, sure, like the show doesn't handle, I guess, the slice of life genre nearly with this amount of interesting formatting and just like approach for the rest of the show, but I will say that like the first episode, there's a lot of very interesting things going on in terms of like like essentially kind of like cities versus country bumpkin type of thing. And the show and the episode closes out the first episode with essentially this, he gets just randomly kind of like shoehorned last minute into performing in front of a crowd that was supposed to be there for like an indie rock band, right? And looking back and just listening to that piece and that performance, I can only say like it was so good that I wish that like that level had like been paralleled with the like for the rest of the show. I'd say that like just even from like a musician's standpoint, like oh my gosh, like the PC performed. I think the visuals, like the way they kind of like they kind of storyboarded like his performance, where they've like like kind of like put in like little clips of like his grandfather's quotes and like his emotions and all that. I think they all lined up just so well that yeah, like this is just like such a magical first episode that like it just left me like just really hyped for kind of like a return to glory. What did you think of this first episode?
A part of me believes
Yeah.
that whoever the mangaka who wrote this
Yeah.
really had the reason why the first episode was nailed so well is because I think the whoever wrote this
Yeah.
manga
Mm-hmm.
has thought about this specific beginning
Yes.
as the core of the show, and I
Yeah.
think
Mm-hmm.
everything that comes after is more of a, okay, now that I have this all like written down and something
Yeah.
rehearsed in my head,
Mm-hmm.
now what follows is kind of more like, okay, now I have to
Like
do the
he's
writer's
coming up.
process
Okay.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And so that's how I felt when I
Yeah.
watched this first episode. I was like,
Mhm.
wow, if you look at it from the rest of the episodes, right, it's
Yeah.
so unique because there's not that many, like we don't see all the characters except for the main character, and I think the lady with the glasses, right,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
she's
We saw.
watching.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really just about the main character and what he's
Yeah.
going through, which I think is easy to encapsulate in the first
Yeah.
episode. I think it does it so well.
Yeah. It's just it was incredible. And yeah, I mean, if I had to cast a theory, I'd agree with you on this one. I would bet money that yeah, I mean, this first episode was probably, like kind of like the brainchild of, this mangaka's just like, just daydreamings and all that. He finally put it down into paper, and it's just like this amazing knock it out of the park first episode premise. I'd say that like this was the rest of the show. Now that you bring up that comment, it is true where I say that like the rest of the show distinctly feels like a very very clear cut continuation of everything that's presented in episode 1. Where it's like essentially it's like, oh, here are all these elements, let's now discover these elements, and it kind of just goes off of that. And so yeah, amazing first episode. I'd say can't although the show was still rated pretty highly by both of us overall in the Gauntlet, can't say it like holds up at that level throughout the whole series, but I will say, if you're looking just for an amazing opening to a show, like this one's definitely going to be my pick. I think that this one earns a best first episode award very deservedly. Alrighty. So that's the best first episode. Do you have any more comments for this one? Do you want to move on to the next one?
Now we can move on to the next one.
Alrighty. The next award is just best episode in general.
Yeah, so this one, so the first one I left it. I don't know if you saw in the form that I gave or I showed you, but for best first episode it was open. But this one was already locked because specifically we were looking at the score.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've been following our podcast, you already kind of know which episode this is because it's by far the highest rated episode we ever had.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be Odd Taxi.
Yeah.
Episode number 13. I wrote somewhere I think the average score was 10.6.
Yeah.
And it is the current bar at the moment.
Yeah. I'd say that like okay, just for a little bit of background context, I can't say that I was following like anime lists and all that. I will say in general too, I tried, like I wasn't going to like follow it like extremely closely just because I wanted to make sure that my perspective was unbiased. That being said, after this finale came out, this one immediately shot to top 45 for anime list all time. And if you were to take out all the Gintama different seasons and the movies, it becomes a top 25. And I think that does speak kind of like to the impact of this last episode. I'm not sure exactly where the show was before this last episode got aired out, but like after this last episode, like immediately got shot up, like like anime forums and stuff like that. Just all
I also think do you know the anime YouTuber Giguk?
Yes.
He made a video about this specific show. He was saying why isn't everyone watching this, and I think that also helped a lot.
I see. So yeah, it was. So I guess we had some help from the community. And yeah, I have to say I agree with him. This was, in my opinion, always like out of all the shows that we watched, relative to the hype that we saw, I guess kind of like going into it, this is definitely kind of like the dark horse, like like best hipster pick, so to speak, or like the ones that like not everyone's talking about, right? For example, like 86 was like everyone in their like every other person like knew about 86 coming in, like it was like a pretty hype show, that type of stuff. Whereas like for example for this one, it's relatively not as well known, like to start off, right? But I think that yeah, I mean this final episode, I think that I personally would be very surprised if in the anime format I ever see a show that kind of like punches that big of a punch all in the ending, because specifically of like the mystery format, I think, and just like the way the story is storyboarded and like essentially kind of the way they did the writing, everything with this much convergence that all gets packed up right until the very last episode. I do think that that's like pretty like that is definitely due to like kind of like the way the show is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it has. If another show is gonna surpass, it has to be some sort of mystery.
Yes.
Because I'm trying to think past like all because a lot of great final episodes usually is more of a nice grand gesture of the journey, right? I'm thinking like the finale of Violet Evergarden. The episode is nice, but it's more of the encapsulation of the. But then when I'm like, okay, what's a show where the ending was like, it made like a big impact. Now I'm thinking like Steins Gate. Steins Gate last episode was really cool because you see
really good,
the beginning of the episode, and the only way to achieve that is through the mystery genre.
Yeah, and so it's like there are it's definitely in part due to the fact that the format of the show, whether it's like Steins Gate or Odd Taxi, there's an element of mystery, right, where like you're trying to piece the puzzles together, and so that element by itself already does it decently. I will say that even outside of that mystery, though, when it's just talking about kind of like the way they wrapped up each. They have a crap ton of characters in the show, and I think that they addressed most of the characters like the way that all their stories kind of finally come together. I mean, is it a little bit like, shall we say, like very fiction perfect storytelling as kind of, right? Because a lot of the storylines essentially all converge at Otakawa driving off the bridge, right? And you have this kind of scene, and then then it kind of like begins to unwind. But I will say that like I think that all of that storytelling and just like seeing how everything kind of eventually comes together works really well. And if I'm gonna be honest, right, the thing I would say, like statistically, that probably wowed the most people overall, if you were to just pull everyone, was essentially the big reveal, right? I think this is the last
For
thing.
sure.
The big reveal. Spoiler alerts for some reason, if you're watching this without actually having watched the show, please mute this until you see the next slide. But essentially, the big reveal is that all this entire show, right? All this anthropomorphism we find out is actually a very very intricately tied into the mechanisms of the story, right? Even like the blurred lines and the art style and all that. When that all comes together, it feels really amazing as a viewer to watch because you've watched this show for 13 episodes. You've seen all these things that are happening. There's little things here and there that you may or may not have picked up, but it all makes sense, right? And in a way, like we've talked about this on the show like a countless amount of times, where we talk about how anthropomorphic characters have like certain storytelling advantage and all that, but especially now if you kind of like take a look back and realize like, oh, like these are representations of this world in Otakawa's eyes. There's like an extra amount of, shall I say, like it feels like an extra amount of closure slash like depth to kind of like this entire journey that we've been through, right? And it just, yeah, I don't know, it just I honestly, like, it blew my mind so much. Like, I remember after watching that episode, I felt like it was torture to wait to talk about it on the podcast like the next day with Natsu, and it was just, yeah, absolutely amazing. Any extra thoughts you want to add to that?
I just thought it was great. It delivered the mystery.
Yeah,
Because it could have been so wrong. If this episode didn't turn out, if it went any other way,
yeah,
I feel like we as the viewers just wouldn't be satisfied. If
yeah,
anything, it would really sour the entire show. Like
yeah,
this is a
mm-hmm.
show where it really, if you don't nail the ending, your show's gonna like
Yeah, your
plummet
show's
in
gonna
terms
flop.
of the
Mm-hmm.
ratings and the
Yeah,
rankings. So
mm-hmm.
it's great that it did pull it off. It was like I think a big gamble too, because uh if I don't know. Like just I think just the way they also handled the cat in his room.
Yes, yeah,
The fact that I afterwards I was like,
yeah,
wow, that is so smart and so great.
yeah,
They just nailed it. Like they just knew
yeah.
what they were doing.
Yeah, like it's like technically, right? The cat in the room, like you could, okay, if you were to do like if you were to do, shall I say, like an academic analysis of it, you could say that it's like, oh, it's a piece that's placed there like partially for humor's like sake, right? It's like it's supposed to kind of be like a humor thing, but I do think that it speaks to like, yeah, it's just like it executed so well to like the point where like it wraps up like I don't know, it's so like even I think it speaks to the quality of the episode when like that detail, and sure, like it's not like a insignificant detail, but just a detail nonetheless, like just feels like it just like nails so well, like it just makes you feel like really satisfied watching it. And yeah, definitely, I think this one, it doesn't surprise me at all, right, that this one essentially got a unanimous best episode. So yeah, that's the best episode award. For our
Yeah,
next
well,
one.
it's gonna be best VA performance. It's unanimous for the both of us.
Okay.
Did you have any honorable mentions for this?
I will actually say, there were some honorable mentions. Specifically, I'd say for Odd Taxi characters and Koikumo characters. I think those were also pretty well done.
Any specific
The
characters?
reason why those didn't end up making it to the final, I guess, like to contest this pick is because I think that there wasn't, even for those shows, even though the voice acting was pretty good, it wasn't stand out enough to the point where like immediately just go, oh my gosh, like I have to do this. Like for this one, I was just like, oh yeah, like it stood out like crazy. I was like,
Yeah.
like this is gonna be like, this is exactly like, like and
So how did you what kind of parameters did you set for yourself in
yeah.
terms of trying to find a good VA performance?
Yeah, I'd say that we'll talk a little bit more about this once the pick gets revealed. But before the pick gets revealed, I say that like for me it was how much, number one, did the character feel enjoyable to process? Now, I don't say enjoyable as in like, oh, you have to like him. For example, like a Joffrey character is amazingly Joffrey from Game of Thrones, right? Like everyone notoriously hated the shit out of the kid, but he was like, did an amazing performance, right? And like that could be, for example, what I would call like a good performance, right? And so there's kind of
Yeah.
like the impact level. I'd also say that in terms of it's interesting because there's always part of this that's going to be part of like kind of the writing, and so you have to give credit to the writing whether a character feels dynamic
Yeah.
or not. But I'd say like adding extra emotional depth to the dialogue. Okay, so let's say for example, if you were to imagine some of these, if you were to digest these stories in a light novel format or a manga like with panels format, like how much has the voice actor actually elevated it, right? How much extra emotion do they bring? How much extra personality do they bring to like the role essentially? And like yeah, like so I thought about like outside of just like what happens to the character, like what did they do with like the character like when they're voicing them, right? Did it make it feel extra alive? Did they make it feel could you really feel the emotions? Could you make it feel all that? And those are my parameters. What about you? What were you
Yeah.
kind of looking for?
So when I think about voice acting, I agree with everything that you said. I think one of the
Okay.
things that I imagine is,
Yeah.
can another person, if I were to insert that person to do the acting, could they
Yeah.
do the same performance? Because I think if you have a character where you're like, oh yeah, I can see someone else doing it, and it'll be
Yeah.
okay, it'll be good.
Yeah.
Then I think that person doesn't deserve the award. I want someone who
Yeah.
really does elevate the character, and I think I guess we can. I have something to add to it, but we could
Yes.
go ahead and first show
Yeah.
the winner, which is going to
Alrighty,
be
which is
Jun Fukuyama, who voices Matsumoto from Vivi Flirt Ice Song. And one of the reasons why I chose him is because he's not like a human person
yeah.
in the anime. He's either a teddy bear or a cube, or
Yeah.
a number of cubes.
Yeah.
And the fact that he has a lot of emotions when he delivers his speech. Because there are moments where I can recall like him shouting, right? Because
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, Vivi, just hurry up,
Yeah.
yada yada. But then there are also the quiet and the solemn
Yeah.
moments where it's like kind of like sad, kind of
Yeah.
like deep, and he's like,
Yeah.
even the ending
Yeah.
scene where it's like,
Oh yeah.
hey Vivi, what are you doing? And but
Oh.
there's like, that there's like a
Yeah.
journey that's
Yeah.
been involved, right?
Yeah. You
And
like
so
hear. Yeah. I will say that this one, I will acknowledge, right, that essentially if you wanted to go for like a grand home run slam in terms of like, shall I say, like the voice performance, you need to having a conduit, a visual conduit that basically cannot actually emote will showcase it that much more because it's that much harder, right? Which
yeah,
is exactly what you're talking
exactly.
about, right? It's like, let's say for example you have let's say Otokawa, right? Like, oh, like a decently voiced character and all that, but like it helps a lot, right? When you see him like emotes and all that type of stuff, right? Like this, whereas like for Matsumoto's character specifically, man, it's a cube, right? The most you can do with it is occasionally like little
Bounce
emoticon
the
thingamajigs, right? That
eyes,
like yeah,
eyebrows,
bouncing,
yeah.
like, and the fact that he still made his character so alive, like even despite, shall we say, this like this visual slash just presentation hurdle, right? I think just like for me it was just so easy to pick this one because I was like, oh yeah, man, like it's just like the voice acting for this one is like particularly just like, yeah, it just makes it pop so much, right? I think that when you were describing the last episode, like, man, like I think like when he visits, yeah, it's like bring it back to the time where he visits well, we're technically the most appropriate would be to call it the diva statue back. Well,
No, I think
okay,
she
okay,
first there as Vivi. Like,
okay,
oh
so
hey,
Vivi,
you're
okay,
Vivi. Remember that?
okay. Okay, so yeah, essentially the diva slash Vivi character when he visits her back again, right? Like, and there's just this level of like kind of partially where it's like, oh, like remember me, old friend. At the same time, kind of like a reminiscent tone, and like this is like he didn't even have that much lines, right? But you could feel like the emotion a lot, and I think that that was like just like a perfect example, right? You know, whereas it's about him talking about this grand mission, right, and the doubts and like the highs and the lows, right, like eventually gaining from a oh my gosh, you're just such a like little shit, I don't know why the director chose you, right, like ranging from that emotion all the way to eventually becoming, oh wow, like the respect that's there. I think that the show wouldn't nearly have been as good, like not even close, if Matsumoto's voice actor essentially didn't go the the lengths to essentially kind of like do such a good job, because I think that the cube, right, and Matsumoto ends up being essentially like the second, I would say like the second main character of the show, right, and like providing a foil essentially for Vivi really makes it like a like it elevates the story, elevates Vivi's character, and obviously his own. So yeah, hats off to this one. Amazing voice acting performance. It was, even though I had some honorable mentions, the fact that I couldn't name one particular one that I think that stood out like a crazy amount. Yeah, this one was just by far one of my easiest picks. So yeah. Anything else to add to this?
I think we should move on for the sake of
Alrighty,
time.
alrighty. The best score. So
Yeah,
so
so this is the same question to you. What did
yeah.
you how'd you base your selection off of? Because
Um.
we chose the same one.
Okay. Yeah. I say that the best score for me is how much the music essentially elevates the storytelling. So specifically the score, this isn't the opening, this isn't the ending. This is something that happens like in the middle of your show, right? And I think that, like when you think about the emotions of a scene, how much did the music contribute to it? I think that's the biggest thing. That's like the most primary thing that I took into account, right? Like you think of like amazing movie soundtracks. Like there are some that are really serious. There's some that are very jovial or whatever, right? But like at the end of the day, like it's like, oh, like whether it goes from like Hans Zimmer level of like sober or sober and serious all the way to like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? John Williams and all that type of stuff. Like whether it doesn't matter like what the tone is, like you just need to elevate whatever is going on. And so for me, I just thought of what soundtrack elevated the show the most, and so that was what I went for. What about you?
So I did more of a encapsulating best audio
Okay.
essentially.
Okay.
So I also separated open ED.
Yeah.
That was not included in
Yeah.
my
Mm-hmm.
scoring
Mm-hmm.
parameters. It was focused on the music in the background during the
Yeah.
show,
Mm-hmm.
the sound effects that were played in the show, as
Okay.
well actually all the overall vocal performance as well.
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
kind of extended it just because
Yeah.
if we did it just by for me personally, for just by background music, there
Yeah.
might be a lot of animes that kind of don't even qualify because they might not even have that much.
Yeah.
So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of added
Yeah. Okay.
sound effects as well as
Mm-hmm.
overall voice casting, and
Yeah.
the winner
It
is
is
Vivi
Vivi.
Fluorite
Yeah.
Eyes song.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I just really enjoyed the sound effects a lot,
Mm-hmm.
the fight
Yeah.
sequences, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little bit easier to incorporate to
Yeah.
music when
Mm-hmm.
the droid here
Yeah.
is a singer. So I mean,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking about those Snow White notes as well
Yes.
because
Mm-hmm.
they also do
Yes. Yeah.
music. They kind of
Mm-hmm.
get the upper hand in this category, but
Yes.
I
Mm-hmm.
think Vivi really takes the cake in terms of overall voice acting as well
Yeah.
as the sound effects.
Yeah, definitely. I think that yeah. In terms of honorable mention, definitely, those Snow White notes was my honorable mention for this one. I think that Vivi, at the end of the day, I think that it really delivered like up and beyond. And actually, as a little minor spoiler, I'll go back to this point. I'll loop this back to a point for another one of my awards later.
Okay.
But yeah, essentially, I think that it elevates this show in particular. I think the integration, right, and like just like outside of like, because I do think like Snow White Notes like soundtrack on its own is also just amazing, right? Or like like
Yeah.
the soundtrack that happens during it. But I think that when you talk about the integration into like the moments and like all that type of stuff, I do think that Vivi's ends up being, shall I say, like the most like memorable. And so for me, it wasn't
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't very difficult to pick this one. Alrighty, the best.
All right, so this is our first difference. So the first
Okay.
one is going to be the best opening sequence. So
Okay.
I can talk about my honorable mention. So this was really tough for me because I had, I
Yeah.
think, about five.
Yeah.
One so one of the selections that did not
Hmm.
get the
Okay.
award and
Yeah.
was a show that we did not end up carrying so
Yes.
far. It
Hmm.
was the opening for uh, Blue Reflection Ray.
Oh yes. Okay.
I actually really
Yeah.
quite enjoyed the opening.
Hmm.
I'd say it would be my third place.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so that was one in contention,
Yeah.
and the other songs that were in contention are will also be Odd Taxi's opening song.
Yes. Hmm.
Was one that I was looking at, as well as To Your Eternity's opening.
Yes. Hmm.
I
Yeah.
thought they were all really good, but ultimately I decided to award the best opening
Okay.
sequence to Tokyo Revengers, the song "Crybaby" by Official Higa Dandism. I think the song has just so much emotions
Hmm.
into it. I think I don't know. It just mesmerizes me a lot, especially when we look at the opening sequence, like the
Yeah.
visuals of it
Hmm.
too, and how it relates to the song. And it's funny because we mentioned, or you mentioned like a week
Yes.
ago, 2 weeks
Hmm.
ago, that this character was a crybaby, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, wait, that's the title of
Yeah.
the opening,
Hmm.
and I think it just
Yeah.
fits so well for the character,
Yeah.
and kind of the whole adventure that he is so far taking. I mean, we're not sure how it ends, but for right now, I think the music is very fitting to the overall
Yeah.
show. Overall
Definitely.
show.
Yeah.
So, "Crybaby" is my song.
Yeah, definitely. To kind of segue over to the best opening sequence for mine, the Crybaby made it into the honorable mentions. Alongside Taxi, and whatchamacallit, To Your Eternities.
Oh, I also forgot 86
Oh,
as
86
my
is okay.
yeah.
86, and if there were a third tier, I'd say I put 86's in there. And actually, out of all the shows, like you said, out of all the shows that we ended up cutting really early, I just like went back and listened to them because I was like, oh, you know what, like kind of want to like figure that out. And like, yeah, this one was ended up being one. I was like, oh, this is actually pretty nice. For Blu-ray reflection. That being said, I do think that there was one that stood out a little bit more than the others. Although, let me think. I mention? So I mentioned Odd Taxis. I mentioned Revengers. I mentioned To Eternity. Oh, and um, what you call it? There was one more. There was one more.
Let me see. I can go down the list
Okay,
for
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. Let me see. Let me think if there's one.
Could it be um which one would you like? I was considering Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro.
Oh,
Uh
sorry.
Koikimo is also something that I was
Koikimo's
Koikimo
is
was a
also
big
really
one.
good. What should I call it? This is the first opening for those Snow White
Those
Notes.
Snow White
Yes,
Notes.
those Snow White Notes. The first opening for that one I thought was really nice. I think that it was like it was a pity because I think that the show just didn't match the energy of it. But like the
Yeah.
energy was like really nice, and I was like, oh, like this is amazing. That being said, my award for the best opening sequence is Seimei no Aria by Wagaki Band for Mars Red. I thought that this one was the most memorable opening. I think that it was. If you listen to the song, right, it's very shall we say,
It's
it's a
more
mix between
traditional.
it's a mix between traditional styles, like traditional Japanese music styles, like the
Hmm.
pentatonic scales and all that, versus like a modern. I will say that like I thought that this one was the one that ended up being by far the most memorable opening. I
Mm.
think that it like I think it stood out because like those Snow White Notes opening, like it was like very unique. So first of all, you kind of had the unique edge going for it. I thought that it was just like I don't know, like I think if I will admit that I think the opening sequence for this one it was paired. My decision was also paired by not only the song itself but also kind of like how it paired with the opening. And like man, like
Hmm.
I'm not gonna lie, like watching that opening always gave me so much hope for the show, and I was just like, damn, like like it's just this could be like such an epic this could be such an epic play, right? Because this ends up being like a historical
Yeah.
time period of a play, and I felt like it encapsulated like that idea like really well, and so yeah, that was my best opening sequence. And to move on to the best ending sequence, apparently we have a tie for this one. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know about you, but when I
Hmm.
saw the category ending sequence, the
Yeah.
one that I can so easily
Oh
remember
yeah.
was this. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's so good. I
Yeah.
just don't know. I even have the song downloaded to my phone, so I think the
Yeah.
bias kind of helps that too.
Yeah. I will say that, like, there is, I will fully acknowledge there is kind of a, shall we say, like, outside of just the ending sequence alone as a song, there is also some mechanical things that come into play with this. But without further ado, the award for the best ending sequence. Oh, the best. Wow, what just happened there? So the best ending
Oh,
sequence is "Until I Wake from Dreaming" by Milia Kato and the Yoshida brothers. Those Snow White Notes.
yeah. So the reason why you linked is because I
Okay.
think that Milia Kato and the Yoshida brothers is a link that I kind of forgot to unlink.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
Let's
a
see.
so you could go to present again.
Okay.
Probably
Let's see.
escape in the present.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
there. Go to the left.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So it was this song. I can remember, and I think the show also used it really well
Yeah.
in the show as well.
Yeah.
I think that at least for someone who listens regularly to Japanese music,
Hmm.
I quite like the kind of the fusion of using the shamisen in this song.
Yeah.
Um, with pop, so it makes it really catchy, at least for me.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's, I guess it's not too surprising to me, right, that that a music show ends up
Yeah.
taking it, right. Like, there's definitely some elements of it where the way it's used in the story ends up making it a lot more memorable. But yeah, to know, I guess, not to my surprise, to neither of our surprise, this one ended up taking the best ending sequence award. And yeah, the next one, we have the best fight sequence. Apparently, we also picked the same one, which is surprise. I guess, okay. There were a lot to pick from. Okay, there are a lot to pick
Yeah.
from.
We initially
Yeah, yeah,
thought that this wouldn't be an award because
yeah,
we thought, oh, there will never be that many fight sequences in
yeah.
every season.
Mm.
There's not even that many combat heavy shows this season,
Yes.
and we
Mhm.
still were able to like kind of draft a
Yeah.
lot of sequences. And so
Yeah.
we're like, okay, this can be a category.
Yeah. And yeah, even despite there being so many categories, right? Even if we think about individual shows, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of different fight sequences that happen in each show. And so this is not only,
Yeah.
we didn't just pick the best, the show with the best fight sequence. We actually even narrowed it down to specifically,
The
which,
sequence.
yeah, like the sequence. And so, yeah, let's reveal it and then talk about it a little bit more. The best
Yeah.
fight sequence award goes to Vivi versus Elizabeth on the Sunrise, for Vivi's Florid's I Saw, episode 4. Yeah, I gotta say, I think this was the moment where I was willing to give the show kind of like a, man, this show just does everything really well. I think, like, after I saw
Yep.
this one, I was like, yo, like, their animation, their sound effects, like, everything, like, it's like, okay, let me put it like this. Not to disrespect some of the titles from old, the shonens that raise a lot of little kids, but like, this was honestly, like, this is the type of hand-to-hand combat stuff that I want to see, right? It's like, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
like, yeah, it's like, I see this and I'm just like, dude, I wish like more Naruto fight sequences look like this, right? It's like, and like, yeah, I get that there's like a mechanical thing where like a lot of ninjutsu's used and stuff like that, but it's like, dude, like, holy crap, like, it felt so good, right? Like, I think that, just like, it felt incredibly visceral, I think, right? It's like, it's the sound effects, right? When the blows land, right? It's like being able to like feel like not only like the speed and the power, but also kind of like the matched emotions behind it. I think, like, yeah, man,
Yeah, you the viewer need to be able to. The fight can't be too quickly.
Yes.
Some fights, like when you think of shonen,
Yeah.
they're too fast,
Yeah.
so you can't really see what's going on. But with this one, you hear a sound effect, you know what's being hit,
Yeah.
and it's just slow enough that you can tell where everything is going on. And I think even my runner up was also from the show too, when she
Yes.
versed the other cyborg later on. I forgot what the
whatchamacallit?
the guy from Tok.
Yeah. Whatchamacallit?
But yeah, that I mean
Yes,
that
exactly.
sequence was my runner up. I think
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. I think this was the episode where it's like,
Yes.
wow, this is like this show can do it all.
Yeah, exactly, right. I saw this one, I was just like, yo, this is crazy. I was like, damn, it's just the animation studio, like I just have to give them so much props because I think like they executed it like so well. Like this is one of those shows where like I can't imagine, and I'm like really glad that I kind of like digested this show through the anime format instead of like reading it through a manga, because like I'm sure the manga story would have still been sweet, but like man, like you would be missing out on so much just between, you know, the other award of the voice acting, right, and then like, you know, like the fight sequences, like man, like it's just like it's amazing. And so yeah, that's the best fight sequence award. The next award goes to best animation. And apparently we also have agreement on this one. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think there's
yeah,
like no surprise with this
yeah,
show, especially how we're talking
yeah,
about the previous awards. And so
yeah,
the winner for best animation is Vivi, Florid Ice Song with Studio.
yeah. I will say that the only ones that even came like semi close, and even when I say semi close, I put the word semi in very heavy emphasis because I think like no other show even like came like got to
Yeah.
this degree. I think 86 also did a very good animation job for the most part, but man, like I think like, you know, this like I guess to no viewer surprise, right? It's like when we praise about how good like the fight sequence is, like that level of quality. If you carry it like throughout the show, it's like man, like it's just actually the animation is just some top notch stuff. Like it's like this is one of those shows where like yeah, it just gets elevated so much, right? Whether it's like for example, like I'm like trying to think of like an example where I thought the animation was just like so crucial. It's like Violet Evergarden, right? Like some of those scenes where like, oh, like, you know, she jumps into the lake and like that type of stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, like you watching it as a video, like an audio visual experience. Like
Yeah, for
man,
sure.
like it's just like it can't even come close. It's like you, no matter how much you describe the scene, like there's just like you can't capture the beauty, the visceralness of like it, right? And this show like reminds me exactly of that, right? It's like, oh, the emotions, right, of like, you know, the pain of characters, right, the uncertainty, the combat, like and all that. It's just like it's just so well done that yeah, it's like when I watch it, like it's a constant like I get dopamine from watching how amazing this show is, right? Like just like the way it looks and stuff like that. So yeah, best
Yeah,
animation.
I think
Yeah.
I think of shows like when
Mm-hmm.
for best animation too is like,
Yeah.
okay, what's a show that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it typically has to be a show that I'm excited to watch for, because
Yeah.
if the animation is poor, there's already like a part of me that doesn't kind of want to watch it. But
Yeah.
Vivi was by far always a show that I wanted to watch.
Yeah. Definitely. Alrighty. Best writing is also a tie. So yeah, best
Did
writing.
did you have any honorable mentions for best writing? Because this one for me was like a tier on its own, in my
Yes,
opinion.
I will say that like when I looked at this one, when I tried to think of honorable mentions, like I had to kind of reach and like think. Like so, for example, right? Let's talk about like, oh, like for my opening ones, it's like, oh, like I had to kind of deliberate and like figure out like which
Yeah.
ones, but like I'll just be honest, right? For animation and for this one, I felt like it's just like so easy. Instantly, it's like you knew what the answer was. I knew what the answer was. And so yeah, without further ado, the best writing award goes to Odd Taxi. I think that this, just as we've praised this so much in the show, in the podcast, this is like a masterclass. This story is truly this story, this anime story is just a masterclass when it comes to like how to write characters and how to do writing. I think that like it's just so well navigated. And yeah, it's like by far like if you had to for best character, like if you had to if you had to give that award to an entire cast, right? I think this one would win that award just because like of how consistently good almost every character that we encounter is, right? Without spoilers, there's gonna be another, you know, alluding to another award we have. But yeah, I think that, you know, it's just how alive the characters are, right? Like if we're gonna be honest, right? If you were gonna talk about like a if you were to evaluate every episode and kind of what happens in the show, like you were to write this down, right? Like, oh, this is event A, then event B, then event C. Just by itself, it's okay, but it's not that amazing, right? I think that it comes to life because, right, like, oh, each of these characters, you know, their haughtiness, their greed, their pride, like, you know, their like their deep desires and all that, right? It comes so alive. I think just between the interactions of the characters and like yeah, I think that, you know, when I mentioned voice acting honorable mentions, I mentioned the cast of Odd Taxi because also yeah, it's just like I said, like it's it's surprising how much I fell in love with the dialogue because I'm not a native Japanese speaker, right? It's like I'm reading subtitles when I watch this, and I still feel like, man, this dialogue is just so witty and it's just like amazing. Yeah. Um.
Yeah, I mean it's a show that's really carried by its writing,
Yeah.
because animations are solid, or they're
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
I
They're
mean
definitely.
that was also part of it. Let's
Yeah.
be
That's
real.
yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me, but the writing was crisp. It
Yeah.
was something that we already like kind of noticed in the first episode because of all
Yes.
the episodes. We were like, wait, this writing is so distinct
Yeah.
and so
Mm-hmm.
crisp, that you get excited for it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fine that it's a dialogue heavy show,
Yeah.
because it's just that much enjoyable, and
Yeah.
I just don't see a world where any other show gets best writing.
Yeah.
uh
Exactly. You know,
I
like
mean,
it's a,
Vivi
yeah.
kind of could
Vivi.
have
Yeah.
contended if the ending was a little bit more different, in my
Yes.
opinion.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
Odd
it's
Taxi
like
was just good
yeah,
throughout.
yeah. It's like amazing. Like I just like felt like I was like holy crap. Like it just like from beginning. It's like I said like event wise, it's actually not that thrilling. Like I'm gonna just be honest, right? It's like if you were to just literally capture the events that happen, like it by itself, it's like it's not that outstanding. Like it's definitely like yeah, like the characters and like just it makes it come to life. And so yeah, like the writing, I think that like yeah, like just the writing, without a doubt, one of my easiest awards to hand out. So yeah, best moment. Okay.
Yeah, it's different for the both of us.
Okay.
So I only had one honorable mention,
Okay.
and I think this is a small moment that I think a lot of people kind of forgot. But when I'm looking at all the times where I felt like, oh my goodness, like
Mm-hmm.
this show is special.
Yeah.
My honorable mention goes to hold on, I wrote this down.
Yeah. I'm
Oh,
actually
actually
looking up.
no.
I'm looking up my.
I got
Okay.
it for you too.
Okay. Okay.
My honorable mention is Momoka's death in Vivi episode 2.
Okay. Yeah.
When she dies and Vivi can't save her, when
Yeah.
Matsumoto takes
Yeah.
control of a crane to stop
Yeah.
Vivi, I was like, oh my goodness, this show is gonna be
Yeah.
special. And
That's
so that's my honorable mention, and it's just something that like because it's episode 2,
yeah.
you might have not remembered,
Yeah.
but
But
I was
I
like, oh my
remembered it. But yeah,
goodness.
like it's pretty freaking
Yeah,
solid.
but for
Yeah.
me, the best moment has to be the reveal
Yeah.
in Odd Taxi episode 13. Uh, I noticed that you have it on your honorable mention
Yeah.
list, but for me, this was something
Yeah.
special because like I didn't see this coming at all, and
Yeah.
it just wraps a lot of stuff. Like the
Yeah.
reveal, like the fact that he
Yeah.
has this condition
Yeah.
answers so many things that were happening in the show, and the fact that a show could hide something like this
Yeah.
yet explain all the
Yeah.
loopholes.
Yeah. It's
It's great.
beautiful.
I
Yeah,
enjoyed the moment.
it's so beautiful. Yeah. And to piggyback off of that, yeah, this one was probably the hardest one I think for me to give an award to because there were a lot of really really good moments. The reveal was obviously I think that the reveal and this one ended up being my two like biggest moments. I think just like the most memorable moments. Some of my honorable mentions. Please fill in the gaps for the ones I don't remember. This one barely counts as an honorable mention because I think it's one of those where it's like it only pops in my mind because of how of the differential between this moment and the rest of the show. And mainly
Yeah,
is
I know which one you're talking
yeah.
about.
And mainly it's a play monologue, right? By DeFroy. In
Hmm.
Mars Red. I think that when it says like, oh, like your journey's not over, I was like, holy shit, this is actually so well done. Like, man, like if the show had more moments like this, where like I think like it captures kind of like the flair and dramaticness of like a Shakespearean-esque play. Like it's like, man, the show would have just like knocked it out of the park. Like,
I'm pretty
and
sure that was the episode I gave the highest score
yes,
for Mars Red. I'm pretty
yes,
sure.
yeah,
I
it
enjoyed
was,
that episode
yeah.
quite.
In fact, that episode got such a high rating from you, it ended up being the second highest of the week, which is incredible for you, right? For your ratings for that
Yeah.
week because like yeah, it's just incredible because Mars Red otherwise like there's just like the fact that that show got to like that level of greatness, I think just in a moment definitely makes me think about it. I will say that like I end up like calling it like a technical honorable mention because I do think that like everything building up to it just like it like made it kind of fall flat. Like I wish like I honestly think that like if they put this like in the, like episode 3 or 4 or whatever, it would have just like the punch would have just been so much better and like would have given so much more juice to like the rest of the story, or at least it could have given more juice to the rest of the story. Anyways, that's one of the honorable mentions. There was the reveal. And there was one more moment. Can you remind me
It's
which one that was?
episode 4 Vivi, the farewell song from Estelle.
Um, the episode song, the Pharaoh moment from yeah, I think that was also like an incredible one. It's I remember just watching. It's just like, dude, like how do you pack this much stuff into like a scene?
Yeah,
It
it's really
actually is like,
sad.
yeah, it's really sad and like it's such good commentary. It's like it talks about like, oh, this is like the meaning of like having a mission and stuff like that. Even though yes, like an android prerogative is different from like the soul of humanity, right? And like just like the human condition, like man, it's just so well done. I think that combined with like the singing and like it's just so tragic and so beautiful. It's just like holy shit, like it's just so incredible. That being said, my word for the best moments goes to the first performance and those still white notes. I think that this one, the reason why the first episode ended up being like just so clearly out of the park was because like I just felt like man, like the way they talked, like they interpolated the grandpa's emotions and like his words, right? And like how it all came together and they put it like they like the scenes of nature and how they like all put it together. I just legitimately saw this coming out of nowhere. I was not expecting this one and I was just like holy, like this just feels like I teared up. Like I just straight up teared up. I was just like it's so like I can feel it, right? And like there's like it's it ends up being the best moment for me, even though like I said, like just between this one, the reveal, and Vivi's, it was really hard to pick. This one ended up winning the award for me just because like man, like it was just like this was like such a well executed, like just completely out of nowhere. I'd say that both this one, yeah, it was incredibly difficult for me to pick between this and the Odd Taxi one in terms of just like the wow factors of like the moments. You're just like holy shit, like this is incredible. But yeah, that's the best moment award for me. The next one is best character. And it looks like we also have a tie for this one. Yeah, I'd say that when it comes to best character, there are a lot of good characters, and I think that a lot of
Yeah.
us could talk endlessly about the amount of characters that we all thought was really good and stuff like that. But there was one that stood out quite above the rest, and that character is Vivi from Vivi Florence Eyes song.
I think
Yeah.
it's just I think the reason why she's a tier on her own, in my opinion, a
Yeah.
tier on her own, is because for her it's really a big journey. The
Yeah.
fact that she had to go through a 100 years journey and kind
Yeah.
of we see the evolution of her character development.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the depth of that character development to her versus Diva.
Yes,
Uh,
I was about to
that
say
that
that. Yeah.
depth, it was just really hard to capture in any other character. Because I
Yeah.
like so for best writer, we gave it to Taxi.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I don't think any of the characters specifically had that much depth compared to Vivi. And I say the same for any other show. I think it's just the journey that she embarked was like grand, and the development that she had to go through was grand, and decisions that she had to make were big and had a lot of impact. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just don't know if there's any other character that I mean you could disagree with me. Did you have a
Yeah.
character in mind that was close?
No, I'd say that this one was just I will say that this character benefits from the mechanics of the show, right? Specifically, essentially, not only does she go through time skips, and memory like resets and stuff like that, but you also essentially get two different aspects, right? It's the Vivi versus the Diva, and yes, like the character benefits immensely from kind of like the premise of the show, but like it's yeah, it's just it's too good. It like stands up above the rest. It's just like absolutely incredible. Like I think that yeah, like the other characters like are, for example, like Odd Taxi, right? Like plenty of the characters there. It's really good. Like they're really well done. But this one, like just this character stands above the rest specifically because of the mechanics. Like there's a certain level of depth that's just like absolutely like you're just like damn, like it's too good. It's too good, right? So yeah, I guess it's not very surprising. Gauntlet Runner-up. Okay, so
Yeah.
I will
So this
say yeah,
yeah,
these
you,
I will say that all the previous ratings we decided to kind of treat it like as a very, for those of you who watch sports, kind of like a Ernie's guarantee, or like like a little bit more, shall we say, like we allowed ourselves to kind of put in our own perspectives, slash like kind of shall we say like a little bit more of a personal spin towards it. Not to say that these Gauntlet Runner-ups and Gauntlet Champions don't have that, but the Gauntlet Runner-ups and the Gauntlet Champions are all a little bit more methodical. And yeah, I do think that these the Gauntlet Runner-up and Champion awards are very reflective of kind of like our entire process as a whole. It's not literally just a transcription of our numbers, but it does take a lot of that into account. And without further ado, yeah, give us an introduction of the Gauntlet Runner-up.
Yeah, so what we did is so the only shows that qualified for this award are shows that survived the gauntlet. So there's only 8 shows, the ones that we showed at the beginning of this podcast. At the end of it all, we each privately ranked them from 1 to 8.
Yeah.
And then we combine the scores. If there is a clear number 1, that show is a Gauntlet Champion. And in order to figure out the runner-ups, there's 2.
Okay.
What we do is we look at the second place.
Yes.
If it's unanimous, right?
Yeah.
The second place of each of our lists.
Yeah.
If it's different, then we got the 2 runner-ups.
Yeah.
If it's a tie, which is in this case it was a tie, then we looked at the ratings of the third show, and we see if it's the same show.
Yeah.
If it's not the same show, then we kind of have to see which of the shows had a higher rankings than the other person's.
Yeah.
So I guess as an honorable mention,
Okay.
For the Gauntlet Runner-up, so in this case 4th place,
Yeah.
was To Your Eternity.
Yep.
It earned 4th place, but in Gauntlet Runner-up, we don't really differentiate second and third here, but the first Gauntlet Runner-up is going to be those Snow White Notes.
Yeah. Yeah. This one ended up, solidly sitting at top 3 for most of the show for good reason.
All of it, actually.
For the entire Gauntlet. For good reason. I think that it's like, even though it could have done more, right? There's definitely could have done a lot more. There's a lot of things that we can talk about, and I think we bring this up a lot in our episodic reviews, right? Where like there's a lot. It definitely like doesn't like hit like a maximum mark, but it does still, just in the slice of life premise, and specifically using music and being a musician as a vehicle, it still does it really well. And even though it definitely falls to a lot of slice of life cliches for a lot of the middle running parts, I think that the good moments, the shining moments, like, are just really, really well executed. And I think that, like, it ends up punching like a very emotionally resonant, like, like it ends up creating a lot of emotionally resonant moments that are just like really hard to forget, right? Like I think that this show like ended up barely edging out some of the other ones for the best moments. For mine, it got like the best first episode. They're all testaments, right? I think to the overall, I'd say the highs of the show are just really well done. Any extra thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so. In my personal list, I put this as number. What did I put? Number 4.
Yeah.
On my personal list, which is why this one won the runner-up. And you're right. I think the show did well. And in a season, you can't expect all the shows to be like magnificent. And so as long as a show has a couple of high moments and is at least semi-consistent, you'll win this the Gauntlet awards. And so I think those Snow White Notes did deliver a lot of good moments. I think you're right. There are some moments that it's really easy to recall. I think for me, for it to have been a champion, I think it needed to kind of tone down the slice of life. Give more depth to these side characters, because I think these side characters aren't as pivotal to the story, because really it's all about Setsu here. And so I think if the side characters are a bit stronger, then I think it could have been a champion.
But it's still pretty solid. Another Gauntlet runner-up, and this one is which place? This would be
technically the second place.
Second place will be Vivi Floret's Eyes song. I think that this show, I think when it comes to individual awards, I think this one probably picked up the most, or came close. Yeah, it picked up the most for good reason. I think that this show as an entire product, like it's definitely going into like my all-time greats when it comes to animes, right? Like just like regardless of what season or whatever, like this one's definitely getting pinned up all the way up there. I think that the premise is really really interesting and very original. I think the way that they handle it is just like it's very very elegantly executed in terms of like storyboarding. When it also comes to just animations and stuff like that, literally the best one by far. Like it's just like it's so great. And so like just as an anime, like it's extremely well done, very well done. It's like all I can say.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I think in terms of did this show do something like not necessarily revolutionary, but
yeah, mm-hmm.
did it break barriers?
Yeah,
I would
mm-hmm.
say no. I
Yeah,
just
not
think it's a
mm-hmm.
very strong
Yeah,
anime that
mm-hmm.
had very strong elements.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe you could have broken the barrier based off the ending if they
Yeah,
altered the ending. I
yeah,
don't even know
mm-hmm.
what they needed to alter, but if they altered it, I think it
Yeah,
have break the barriers.
mm-hmm.
But I think the show that is the champion
Yeah,
broke the barrier and
yes.
really set a precedent on what the medium of anime could achieve.
Yes. And yeah, as a perfect segue into the Gauntlet Champion,
Our first one.
it's our very very first Gauntlet Champion is going to be a taxi. When we talk about revolutionary, when we talk about elevating the medium to like an entirely new level, this is it. This is it right here. I think that like it's very I genuinely, and I think I brought this up on the previous episode where I talk about like I genuinely think that like this show, it's so good that I have no hesitation at all of recommending this show to people who don't even watch like anime as a genre. That's how good it is. That's how
Yes,
like shall I say like
yes.
transcendent it is, right? It's like I don't there is no doubt in my mind that like somebody who's like a TV file, right? Like a show file, like that really just likes watching TV in general, like when they pick this up, like it's going to be like just like the writing of it, the characters of it are going to make it like very enjoyable. And like yeah, it's just like I think that especially right, I think even like leading up towards the final episode of the show, it was already like once again like pretty all I think outside of the first week legitimately always in the top 5 I think, or like close to the top
Almost
5. Okay,
always
yeah,
held number 4. It
yeah,
was always number
yeah,
4.
yeah, almost always held number 4. So like even already had amazing quality, but yeah, it's like when it comes to like mystery, right, and like like the like a almost kind of like a mystery detective type of story, man, this is like the best executed, like I said, once again, one of the best executed finales I've ever seen in an anime. Like I can only even think of like just like shall I say shows in different formats, non anime formats that have like endings that are just as resonant as this one. Like man, like I think that it really speaks to the skill. Okay, let me put it like this. It really speaks to the skill and the quality of the show when essentially a mechanism that we find out about the story, being the art style has a direct canonical explanation, right? And they literally kind of toned down the art style of it, and it still ended up being that enjoyable. It's like just really I think speaks to like the idea of like like this show is just like from like a literary perspective, like it can do it all. And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, you could tell that
Yeah,
the show uh there was a lot of people that poured a lot of love
yeah,
into the making of
mm-hmm.
this show.
Yeah,
When I think so, the animation itself wasn't anything
yes,
spectacular.
mm-hmm.
It was very
Exactly, right.
consistent. There was
Yeah,
never really a
mm-hmm.
lot of still
Yeah,
shots, not a
mm-hmm.
lot of like you could tell that the
Yeah,
same studio worked on
yeah,
this show
mm-hmm.
for the
Definitely, yeah,
duration of the anime.
mm-hmm.
You think of the characters, they're very
Yeah,
specific, very interesting.
yeah,
And I think so. I mentioned earlier how for those Snow White notes,
yeah,
whoever was the mangaka probably thought
yeah,
about the first episode a
yeah,
lot and not really
yeah,
much. I think this show was thought the entire
yeah.
process
Oh
of
yeah,
this
yeah,
needed to happen. This
yeah.
character did this. Like
Yes.
I wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
surprised if they had like a timeline of every
Yeah.
single individual characters and like
Yeah. And
spread
then like
throughout before they animated anything
Yeah.
or wrote anything.
Exactly, right? The fact that like this one had like as a kind of like a bonus feature to the people who are like really into the show, and man, it's going to be discussed a lot now, but it's like the fact that they release like audio recordings, right? Kind of as like a canonical in-universe thing, right? Like just speaks to like the intricacy of like how much like just thoughtfulness was poured into the writing of the show. Like man, like it's incredible.
So
Like
this
yeah.
is an anime original, but
Yes.
they are releasing a manga.
Yeah.
They were releasing it
Yeah.
concurrently, and so it's
Yes.
still being released. And so I
Yeah.
wonder how they will do the ending, if it's going to be
Yeah.
the same or if they're going to have a manga specific ending, which will be pretty neat to digest when it does come out.
Yeah.
But this is
But
one of the shows where so I'm moving to a
yeah.
new place
Okay.
and I was thinking how to decorate
Yeah.
my place. And
Yeah.
I think it'll be really solid for my background once
Yeah.
there's a wall
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
put the poster of all our champions. And so
Yeah.
I'm currently in the hunt for an
Okay.
odd taxi poster
Yeah. You're
just
gonna
to
have.
commemorate this event.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're gonna have to let me know when you find a good one, because this show I just can't praise it enough. Like I genuinely think that like it's just one of those shows where like it's like I think after okay, so after I watched the episode I was just dying so much to talk about it, but like there was a day between when I watched this episode and when we were gonna talk about it on the podcast, and so I went on the internet and just try to like like gonna get like a sense of
It's
community
so
about like
good.
yeah, like just like like just share the hype and like the excitement and just like the collective just like oh my gosh, like I love this so much, right? I wanted to like feel a community sense of it. And I remember when I went on there, one random comment that somebody put on was like, dude, when they make merch, when they make that gorilla eraser, when they make whatever, like it's gonna sell like freaking hotcakes, like just like
Yeah.
crazy, right? It's just gonna like just go right off the bat. And like I do think like yeah, it's the fact that like yeah, like I think that this show's like writing is just so solid that like it's gonna be one of those things where like yeah, the emotional resonance is just gonna be there for like quite a while, because yeah, it's like it's a mystery, right? But it's also like just such a very raw, visceral like exploration of the human condition, as cliche as that might sound, right? It's like it's genuinely
Yeah.
right. We see the stories, right, of people who get super addicted to gotchas and video games and just like throw themselves into this hole that they can't dig themselves out of, right? We saw how a seemingly normal person eventually falls into that type of a hole because of how unfair the world is, right? We see the story of somebody who just wanted to be loved and accepted, and eventually creates this entire own world that fits within his viewpoint to be able to kind of like have it all come together, right? We have the story of somebody who really wants to be able to uphold the sense of justice, and just gets torn both ways because his brother like wants to do something else, and he's like very uncertain of who he is as a person, and eventually there's just like this like we get to see all the conflict of that. We get to see the story of somebody who was never any really big thing, but he eventually literally deludes himself into believing that he's a rich person, that he can do all this type of things, that he wants to show a girl that he's worthy, right? He wants to live like the life that he imagined, right? Like the fact that I can just go on for days and days and just talk about like all these characters, right? It's like it's this type of writing that really makes emotional resonance, and like just like you as a viewer, you're not gonna forget, and like you're gonna wanna like, and like I said, to link it back to the comment, like man, if I like see like merch like from Odd Taxi, like this is a show where like I'd want to buy merch from, right? It's not like yeah, posters
Oh,
and
yeah,
all that type of stuff. It's
100%.
like yeah, like just because like man, like it's just so good, right? I think that the most impressive thing, another thing I want to praise it for, and man, is it going to be hard for me to like just contain myself. Another thing I want to praise this show for is that like in the span of 13 episodes, I've seen it do as much character exploration and depth as like literally serial shows. And what I'm talking about is like shows like the NCIS format or whatever, where it's like episodic and like literally you go the same, like it just drags out like a lot. And like usually those show, right, with that amount of runtime, like eventually you're gonna get some pretty good character development. This show managed to achieve that in 13 episodes of sub 25 minutes episode. Like like it's incredible. Like yeah, incredibly tight writing, incredibly enjoyable. If you were to watch one show and only one show from this gauntlet, my recommendation, definitely Odd Taxi.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a show that was surprising to begin with,
Yeah.
and we just had to really just wait to see how this was all going to be wrapped up. And it wrapped up so well
Yeah.
to the point where it's going to make history now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, kudos to the people who, like to bring up Manatsu's comment. Like, you can tell a lot of love was poured into this project, right? Yeah, and I think that, I want to extend a special thanks out to, the writers, all the animators and all that. Like, I think that going out on a limb and doing an anime original is not a very common industry practice, right? Usually you have a vetted light novel that eventually, because the light novel is so good, it becomes a manga. Then a vetted manga that does so well that eventually they decide to pick it up for an anime adaptation, right? That's like the general life cycle, right? Of kind of like, shall we say, like animes. And like for this show to directly just go, we're gonna make an anime original out of it. It's unconventional, but the risk paid off, right? The gamble paid off, and yeah, this is amazing. So yeah. Is there any other slides?
That's it.
Okay. And so
Oh, we
yeah.
actually do have
Okay.
one more slide, which is just our schedule.
Alrighty.
Always the ending for our schedule. So
Yeah.
tonight we had our award show. Next week we're actually taking a break. But the summer season is already actually going on. So if you're interested in watching those shows, go ahead and watch those. But we're waiting for the first episode to be aired, which is going to be in August. So it's a little bit a slight delay, kind of like how we did it for this season as well.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take a break, and the week after, we're going to have a preseason where we watch the trailers. Those will not be uploaded to YouTube due to,
Copyright
DMCA
issues.
kind of stuff, copyright issues, but we'll react to it on Twitch
Yeah.
if you would like to join us then. But yeah, any final remarks for the first season of the Gauntlet?
Yeah, I'd say that it was really enjoyable. I'm hoping that a community gets built up. But yeah, I'd say that the spring season, it was sure like at times like wading through, shall I say, a lot of low quality stuff may have felt like a chore at the beginning, and all that. But
Yeah,
man, was there a lot of good stuff at the end. And I can definitely say that for those of you who are anime enthusiasts, like we welcome you to tag along, whether it's viewing this entire season kind of in retrospect and kind of like as a rewind, or whether it's you want to join us. Like it's fun. I think that it's really fun to do this type of viewing format when it comes to anime. And yeah, I hope that y'all can take this opportunity to kind of join us, right, and like have this community. And yeah, was a very successful spring gauntlet in my eyes. We came out with some great diamonds and jewels at the end, and yeah, was incredibly fun, and I can't wait to see you all next season for the summer gauntlet of 2021. Any final remarks for you?
yeah. I'm hoping the summer season will be just as good. I think spring. Going into spring, there wasn't a lot of hype. Only certain shows had hype, but it really did deliver.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's gonna be so interesting to see the difference in themes, difference in genres, because there's gonna be a lot more isekais in the summer season. Also, a lot less shows. So from my last count, there are only 26 or 27 shows. Compared to the 36, 35 we started. We added Yasuke a little bit later. So it'll be interesting to see how we kind of change the way we view it because of the shows. But I'm hoping the season delivers some goodies, because I know for sure I forget fall and winter. Fall for sure is packed with a lot of good shows. So I'm hoping summer can kind of bridge the anticipation for fall.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think that'd be it.
Alrighty, thanks for watching, and hope to catch you on our preseason show and for our summer gauntlet. Alrighty, signing off. Peace, peace.
Peace, peace.